Hi, this is Pastor Jon Hall with Let's Talk Transformation with Pastor Jon. But actually, what we're going to talk about for a couple of podcasts, for a few of them, is Bible timeline because I did a big research, actually wrote a book, and I'm going to get it online so it can be purchased. Can't do that right now, but all kinds of people are saying all kinds of things about timeline, and I want to clarify all of that. And I think I can do this in a very short period of time, maybe about an hour and a half total, and you will be able to understand everything about the Bible timelines, where they come from, and why people do what they do. So if somebody comes up with a certain date and everything, you actually can understand it. You may not believe that this is possible, but it is because you just have to know the right information, and I'm going to give that to you. So we're going to go right to this, and we're going to put the pedal to the metal all the way from here to the finish of the last podcast, and you will not be bored if you want to know about Bible timelines. Let's get started. So, first thing that we need to know is that only 7 things are needed to we understand and know what they are to understand how all timelines are put together. Just 7, there's not that many, and some of them are you might already know them, so it's not really that big a deal. And we're going to go through all of them. First of all, the calendar is the first thing, very short. Dates for Jesus' birth and life. How did that happen? Number 3, Ptolemy's king list is the mother lode. It's a big, huge, amazingly important thing that we got to talk about. That will change everything, and we're going to talk about that today. Bishop James Ussher was a very big guy, and we're going to actually do 2 with him because we're going to talk about it in terms of Adam to Jesus, and then we're going to talk about how he did that and how people all do the same thing that he did. Dr. John C. Wickham Jr. is really important. You have a date in your book or in your Bible or in any reference source, you're going to find out that that came from Dr. Wickham's timeline he produced in the 1960s. The Jewish calendar, people always referring to the Jewish calendar. It's so many years since creation. Are they right? Do they have it? We're going to talk about that. And then the Sabbath years and the years of Jubilee. Wow, that's a big, huge thing. And people are always trying to make a big deal of that. We're going to explain about what you can say and what you can't say about that. And hopefully that will be a big deal. Be a little bit on the prophetic side, why people are using timelines to try to determine things in the future. So let's get started then with the first thing, about 1 minute long. We all know that our calendar, the civil calendar, was produced by the Romans. Julius Caesar kind of got it going. It's 12 months long. It's 365 days. They messed up on the fact that there's a need for a leap year, but July is for Julius Caesar, August for Caesar Augustus. We know that. I really don't want to spend a lot of time on something that everybody knows. So number 2, Dionysius, he's really, really important. It's very hard to pronounce his last name, so I'm not even going to try. And he's the one that created our BC AD calendar. Now, he lived around 525 AD, and what he wanted to do was place Christ's birth at the center of the calendar instead of the founding of Rome in 753 BC. That's how they did it. They started with Rome as founding as year 1, and he wanted to switch that. So he had a lot of really accurate information. Obviously, it's 1,500 years ago, so he's way closer to that time. And I believe he had a lot more correct information. And what he did was he placed the dates on there that we're familiar with. He put his birth at 1 BC, December 25. He put his baptism as AD 30, and he put his crucifixion, his death, as Friday, April 3rd, 33 AD. Now, he seems to know what he's doing, so that's a pretty big deal. I just want to also say that December 25th, every time there's Christmas rolls around, people are saying, why is it December 25th? Do we know that that's it? I mean, and it probably wasn't, either he, and when I say they, I'm not sure who actually decided let's do that, but most people would agree that they picked that date because they wanted to replace the pagan sun worship celebrations of the winter solstice, and that way they would hopefully move people to think about Jesus during that time instead of the pagan religions. Now, it's interesting to see, and I would suggest there's a reason for this. God could have, I think about this, God could have, but he did not give us Christ's exact day of his birth. So he could have had Matthew, he could have told Luke to put that in there. They obviously knew what it was. So they could have said, so he was born on the 6th day of the 7th month, or whenever that was. He did not do that. Now, what I'm going to suggest about that is that why didn't he actually give us the date? And it's very important to realize that we need to connect the Old Testament to the New Testament chronologically. And really, there's 3 options that people think about or try to do that, because you're coming down from Adam down to Daniel, and then you've got this big gap there of over 400 years. And so they say, well, where do we attach and connect it to the New Testament? It's going to be his birth, his baptism, or his crucifixion. And guess what? There's only one date in the New Testament, and it's in Luke chapter 3, verses 1 and 23. And in verse 1, it is saying that in the 15th year of Caesar Tiberius, which was 30 AD, that was the year that John began to preach. And in verse 23, Jesus was about to turn 30, so he was going to be 30 very, very soon. And that is when he was baptized. You can't mess that up in a way, because you know what? There's just no other dates in the whole New Testament. And that is amazing, because the Old Testament is full of them. So that has to mean something, and I think that's what it means. So now let's go to point 3. We've already done 2 of the 7. Now we start to take a little bit more time. So let's talk timeline point number 3, which is Ptolemy's king list. This is so important. Now, Claudius Ptolemy was a famous Roman geographer. He was a mathematician. He made all these atlases. He was an astronomer. He was an inventor. He was the Leonardo da Vinci of his day. Now, he lived between 100 and 175 AD. And what is interesting is that he placed in the back of one of his books a list of rulers that he had. He got it somehow. And all it had was the name of the ruler and the number of years that each reigned. That's it. We're going to take a look at it here in a second. Now, I found it back in the Great Books of the Western World, Ptolemy, volume 16. But you can find it online now. Back when I was looking at it, online wasn't even a possibility. So that's how long I've been at this. But at any rate, this timeline based on Ptolemy does not account for any co-reigns. It doesn't. Maybe there's mistakes. In fact, I'm going to show you 2 mistakes. Or it could be that when you have a transition between one ruler and the next one, sometimes they give credit to both kings for the same calendar year. Actually, the Bible does that for the kings of Israel, but not Judah. So these are at least 3 things. And now I want to show you that and tell you that Ptolemy's king list, as important as it is never, and I put that in quotes, I'm going to say never and all and always from time to time. We all know that there's somebody somewhere so it's never 100%, right? But just to say it, to say I've never seen it referenced as a source for dating everything. So how do we get the date of Nebuchadnezzar 605 BC? How do we get that Cyrus was 539 BC? How do we get Alexander the Great, the one that everybody talk? If I hear it once, I hear it 5 times every year. Alexander the Great, 333 BC. It's such an easy number, 333. How can you mess up on that one, right? But here's a fact. Here's the actual timeline. Here's the actual list. Now, obviously, I put it in columns, colors, and put the headings there on the top. But the fact of the matter is, if you look on the left side there, on the bottom, that name that with the date 605, that's the way they spelled Nebuchadnezzar. And if you add up all of the years exactly the way they are on this list, starting with 70 AD, back there with Nero, and moving all the way down to Nebuchadnezzar, you're going to come up with 605. Look at the next column there under Cyrus, 539 BC in the light blue color. If you add up all the years exactly the way it's on this list, you're going to end up at 539. And then Alexander the Great in the light green there, 333 BC. We know that date. You add up all those years there, and you're going to end up with that date. And that is unbelievable. Now, just before we move on, I want to say something that's very important. Everybody kind of knows this that's in the chronology world, but all timelines, and when I mean all, like if you don't get this right, you just like reject it out of hand, because all timelines place the destruction of Jerusalem in August of 70 AD. Now, 70 AD then becomes a pivotal year. So when you think about the Bible timeline, you want to think of Adam, and then you go all the way down to Jesus, but then you go to 70 AD when the temple is destroyed. Remember, Jesus said, "This generation shall not pass away till all these things take place." These rocks are going to be, these stones are all going to be cast down. It was terrible. It was terrible. Over 1 million people died all in just a very short period of time. But that date becomes like a cornerstone post, and everybody can attach their timelines to 70 AD. At the end of the day, you're going to end up there one way or another. It's a question, how many years do you have between wherever you've been to that point in time? So that's extremely important. Now, the next thing that we want to know or want to do is that this is the most probably important thing that I can say, maybe of all the podcasts. I mean, there's a lot of things that are very, very important. But this is probably one of the most important one. We're getting it out there on the first podcast, which I think is pretty good. But here is the thing that you need to know, and it's extremely important. It affects all the timelines. So it is the mother lode for all time. Ptolemy's king list is the one. Now, what happened was it became the default dating from the Babylonians all the way down to the Romans. And then what happened was, starting no later than the 2nd century, when Ptolemy put it in one of his books, the events of history, they might have been in the correct right order, like this person came after that person, but everyone began to use Ptolemy's king list years as firm, clear, absolutely this is it, and we're going to put our stories, we're going to put our history in that context of those years. And the reason why we know that is because it matches perfectly, like I showed, Nebuchadnezzar, Cyrus, Alexander the Great, all the rest of the people. Whatever Ptolemy demanded, those are the dates you're going to find in everybody's book, including, interesting enough, James Ussher, when you go from Nebuchadnezzar down to Jesus. So all secular timelines are based on this list. And then here's another one that's super important. This affects the dates that you see in your Bible, because all the dates in your Bible and your Bible reference books are based on that list too. And why did that happen? Because we're going to talk about Dr. John Wickham Jr.'s timeline, which he produced in the 1960s. And that timeline and the dates that are on his charts, we're going to go into depth later. I'm just going to give you an overview here. All of his dates are the ones you see in your Bible timeline. And he specifically said he used those timelines as a thing that he kind of wanted to reconcile with the Bible. He did not want to change any of the Bible things that were very clear. Ptolemy's list has 66 years for the captivity. He has 70. He just, tries to make that work. So this is extremely important. And here are two errors. Here are two errors with Ptolemy that I want to bring up. And then we're going to kind of close off this podcast. But it's going to take a minute here to do this. So the biggest error is found in Ezra. Because in Ezra chapter 4, you have, and we're going to go through this step by step, Darius, Xerxes, and Artaxerxes are named in that chapter. And yet, as the story unfolds, as you'll see, all those three names refer to the same person. But in Ptolemy's king list, he separated them out to three different people for a total of 98 years instead of possibly 36 for Darius himself, not in the Bible, but that's what the history books say. He reigned for 36 years. And so this is just amazingly important. And we're going to look at Ezra chapter 4 and show you how in the book of Ezra it is clearly saying it's the same person. So this is a major error. And it impacts everything and the dates and the years and everything, even in the reference books, as I said, that you look at. So let's start out here. I paraphrased. Well, not necessarily paraphrased. I just took out the words that weren't helpful necessarily. I want to get down to the core story. So this is what happened. The enemies of Judah said, so this is Cyrus, made the proclamation. They all go over to Jerusalem. They're there. They want to rebuild the temple, and they want to rebuild Jerusalem. And they, right off the bat, the people around there that had been living there said, let us help you build the temple, because we also seek the God that you seek, and we worship the God that you worship. Well, Zerubbabel, he didn't like that. He says, we alone will build it. King Cyrus, he gave us the proclamation. He gave us the money. He told us we could do this. He commanded us to do this. We don't need your help. Well, they weren't happy about that, so they set out to discourage the people of Judah from continuing. And it says, during the entire reign of Cyrus, king of Persia, down to the reign of Darius, king of Persia, they just were on their case. Now, that was 14 years between those 2 points in time. And then this is what it says. And you can see you begin to have problems. Because in Ezra 4:6, it says, at the beginning of the reign of Xerxes, they lodged an accusation against the people of Jerusalem. So they're complaining and everything, and then they lodge an accusation. Well, for 14 years they complain, and then Ptolemy's king list would say, well, that would be 36 years later. Well, that doesn't make sense. And then the next verse says, and in the days of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, they wrote a letter to Artaxerxes. Now, if we have Darius, Xerxes, and Artaxerxes, three different people, wow, then if that's true, then Ptolemy is correct about those years, then they waited another 21 years after Xerxes to write this letter. That doesn't make sense either. So let's look at the timeline again. Look in the light blue. So you see where it's Darius, 36, Xerxes, 21, Artaxerxes, 41. That's what we're talking about. It's right there. And Nebuchadnezzar's 605 is based on that. So if you're going to make a huge adjustment there, you got to move Nebuchadnezzar from 605 to 5 something. You know what? 550 or something. It's not it's not 605 if those are all combined, right? So let's move on with the story. So they sent this letter to Artaxerxes, and they basically said, hey, you're the king. Don't you know that they're rebuilding this rebellious city? It's always been a problem. Look into it. You should stop this. So Artaxerxes said, well, okay, I will stop it. Yeah, you're right. This has always been a rebellious thing. So then it says in Ezra 4:24, thus the work on the house of God came to a standstill until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Now, Ptolemy's king list would say, well, that's Darius number 2, and that's another 46 years later, where Ezra is saying, hey, they were making these accusations, and then they got upset, they complained, they sent this letter in the first year, work stopped for a whole year, and then it wasn't until the second year that things got moving again. So then Haggai says, in the second year of King Darius, the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, and they began to work on the house again. So it stopped for about a year. And then 4 years later, the temple was completed in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. So that is clearly what it's saying. Obviously, if Ptolemy is correct, then this is what happened. This is what happened, and this, of course, is just impossible. So they complained for 14 years until Darius' second year, if we're going to follow Ptolemy. They lodged a complaint then 35 years later at the beginning of Xerxes' reign. Then they wrote a letter 21 years later in Artaxerxes' reign. And then Zerubbabel restarts work 46 years later in Darius's the second year. This is what Ptolemy, if you're going to match up Ezra with Ptolemy, that's what you have to do. And that's just impossible. So then Zerubbabel, 4 years later, in the 6th year of Darius, it should be Darius 1, but they're putting him in as a Darius 2, and that's a problem. So just think about this. This makes Zerubbabel at least 150 years old, if Ptolemy is correct, when he gets done with the building. So look at this. Zerubbabel returned with exiles in Cyrus in the first year. He was an elder. He should have been like 40 or 50, but let's just say that we make him 30 years old. Now look at what happens. So he's 30, he goes 14 years for the complaints, and he goes 35 years to they lodge a complaint, and then 21 years they write the letter, and so on, so on, so on. And so by the time he completes it, if he is even 30 years old when he first left in the Cyrus' first year, he'd have to be 150 years old. No one believes that. No one. You don't believe it. Nobody else believes it. This is not possible. Nobody thinks that Zerubbabel was 150 years old. And not only that, this makes no sense chronologically. It doesn't fit with any of the rest of the books about the rebuilding years. And absolutely no one in the Bible, timeline business, charts it that way. They just don't do that. That would be silly. It doesn't fit with anything. So what this means is that Ezra chapter 4 demands that these three names refer to the same king, and Ptolemy's king list wrongly adds 62 years. Now, if you're going to have your timeline and you are going to base it on Ptolemy, and you believe you got the correct days from Adam to Jesus, well, you kind of have to work with these 62 years where he's got it all spread out in different people. That just is unbelievable. Can't happen. So charts that follow Ptolemy are actually totally, when you go from beginning to end, are 85 years too long than they should be. And so 62 of those years come right there. And so don't know where all the rest of them come, but we do know the next heir. We do know that the back in the Caesars too. So there it is. 62 of the 85 years are right there. And this is a damaging observation when it comes to, is Ptolemy's king list something you should trust? And people have used it to date everything back, and then they don't change it. So when you look at the kings and you go back to Solomon and you go back to all those dates, well, unless you kind of like adjust things where you can like squish things together, then you're going to be a lot older than it should be on your timeline. This is a really important statement. And I'm just going to briefly say it. We're going to get back to it. But for those who know what I'm talking about, we have to move Cyrus's decree and Daniel's connection there of 48 years, 483 years. And you say, where does it begin? Well, if you believe in Ptolemy, you're going to have to move it to Nehemiah, and that's why they do it instead of Cyrus. That's exactly why they do it. And so there are too many years here. So if your timeline is based on Ptolemy, you don't have any choice. That's why everybody says the decree was Nehemiah, even though Nehemiah lives many years after Daniel. Daniel was just sitting there. He just heard about Cyrus' decree. The angel says, hey, when this proclamation, when you hear that starting up again, it's 483 years, and then you're going to move it down to Nehemiah. Why do that? Only one reason, because of Ptolemy. So that's the first huge, big problem. There's another second problem, which is tied to the birth of Jesus and dating that. So why do some date Jesus' birth in 4 BC? It's kind of funny, coming around the Christmas times, everybody, okay, when was Jesus born? It was 4 BC. Well, that's not correct. And the problem with that is then people think, well, the Bible's not correct. Dionysius, he didn't know what he was talking about. But I'm going to tell you why this is true. So what happened is Herod's death year is not based on doing just research on Herod and finding out independent. His death year is based on connecting it to Augustus' reign years. So you change Augustus and you're moving Herod, right? So here's what happened. Augustus' reign was wrongly dated by the king list as starting 4 years too early in 30 BC. So they moved him back, and as you go back, after the fact, and then you try to put it all together, then Herod looks like he's died in 4 BC. Well, you can't have Herod die before, Jesus has to be born before he dies. So then you've got to put Jesus back in 5 BC. That's exactly why. But here's some important information. Research now, and who knows how many people had to do their doctoral dissertation to make this happen, but historians now recently moved his reign from 38 BC to 27 BC. They moved it 3 years. Why? This is amazing. Now, I believe it should be moved one more year to 26 BC because that would place Herod's death in 1 AD, just as Dionysius first dated it, and I think we'd be back on track there. But that's unbelievable that they changed that. Now, here is what I would like to share with you that I think is another damaging observation about Ptolemy's king list, on which all our dates, including those in the Bible, are based on. Now, since Ptolemy's king list is just one complete, you've seen it, one complete unified connected time, it doesn't say there's any gaps in those years or anything. If we move Caesar Augustus' reign forward 3 years, shouldn't we move then the years for Alexander the Great? Shouldn't it be 330 BC? Shouldn't it be 536 for Cyrus? Shouldn't it be 602 for Nebuchadnezzar? And then realize that the Three Kings thing, you've got a big move. If you told people right now that Alexander the Great was not 333, it was 330 because they moved Caesar Augustus' date, they would say, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. That's impossible. We know Alexander the Great is 333 because there's, eclipses and observations and all kinds of, but that's not true. What happened is had Ptolemy's king list. They put the story to that timeline. And then, sure, there was some, eclipses and everything that kind of worked out. But those happen regularly, like every 18, 19 years. You get the whole thing happen again. So you can see some kind of astronomy observation, and are you seeing it in this one? Are you seeing it the next cycle or the next cycle after that? You can't verify dates by that, and you don't need. It's obvious that's not the case. It's that Ptolemy's king list and the exact number of years. That's it. So we're going to take a break. That's the end of the first podcast, and we're going to get back to the second one here very quickly. But I just want to say the next podcast does give all the references, and this is what's up next, gives all the references for the 7 time span to chart the years from Adam all the way to 70 AD. I'm going to show you, they're in the reference, and you know what? It's not that hard to do. I can explain it, and you can have all those references. And a lot of the confusion and all those king dates and all those things about the judges and all those things that you think, oh, man, this is impossible. How can anybody do this? I'm going to show you really simply how you can do it. Now, obviously, I always say, please like, please subscribe, and of course, if the Lord leads you, please donate, and the information about how to do that is on the screen there. That would be very, very helpful to us. But make sure the Lord is asking you to do that. Thanks a lot for coming with us. And again, we got the pedal to the metal, and the next podcast, we're going to just keep going. God bless.